INTRO, my dear audience. There's something most men never understand about the psychology of attraction. Women don't become addicted to men because of looks, money, or charm alone. They become addicted because of structure, because of emotional patterns, and because of a man's ability to bring order into a world that often feels chaotic. Women get attached to the men who create a psychological environment where she feels simultaneously challenged, understood, and grounded. And in the modern world, where many people feel lost in uncertainty, overwhelmed by overstimulation, and desperate for something real, this pattern becomes even stronger. A woman's attraction is not random. It is not accidental. It is not mysterious. It follows deeply rooted biological, psychological, and emotional principles that have existed for thousands of years. And when you study these patterns carefully, you realize something fascinating. Women don't become addicted to men who are perfect. They become addicted to men who give them something they cannot easily replace. A man who brings emotional stability. A man who carries himself with disciplined confidence. A man who refuses to shrink under pressure. A man who stands for something meaningful. A man who knows how to regulate his emotions instead of drowning in them. This kind of man becomes rare. And what is rare becomes valuable. What is valuable becomes unforgettable. And what is unforgettable becomes nearly impossible for a woman to walk away from, because her mind keeps returning to the source of the emotional experience she cannot replicate anywhere else. Women don't get addicted to men because of superficial traits. They get addicted to the psychological effect those men create. And when you understand this, you unlock one of the most powerful truths about attraction. Women bond through emotion, but they stay through meaning. They don't stay with a man because he entertains them. They stay because he anchors them. This video breaks down exactly how women get emotionally addicted to certain men. Not because of manipulation, not because of games, and not because of tricks, but because these men represent stability, strength, depth, and direction in a world that often lacks all four. Let's begin with part 1. The man who creates order in her emotional chaos. One of Jordan Peterson's most powerful insights is that people are drawn to those who help them bring order to chaos. This is true in society, and it is absolutely true in relationships. Women become deeply attached to men who can remain calm, composed, and grounded during moments of emotional turbulence, because this kind of presence is extremely rare. A woman's emotional world can be intense. Women feel deeply. They care deeply. They analyze subtle changes, emotional shifts, social signals, tone of voice, and microbehaviors that many men don't even notice. This emotional sensitivity is not a weakness. It's an evolutionary strength. But sensitivity without structure can create internal chaos. And this is where a certain kind of man becomes extremely attractive. When a man can remain steady in the face of emotional pressure, he becomes a source of psychological safety. Not comfort, safety. And there is a difference. Comfort is temporary. Safety is magnetic. A woman becomes addicted to a man who can take situations that feel overwhelming and reduce them into something manageable, something understandable, something she can navigate. Most men become reactive. They argue, they panic, they shut down, or they become defensive when emotions rise. But the man who holds his ground, who listens with intention, who speaks with clarity, who refuses to become emotionally chaotic himself, this man becomes the anchor. This is one of the deepest forms of attachment. A woman bonds with a man who can regulate his emotions better than anyone else in her life. It is not dominance. It is not controlling behavior. It is not superiority. It is emotional leadership. This type of man communicates with his presence that even when things get messy, I can handle it. And the moment she realizes that he can handle emotional storms, hers, his, and life's, she begins to trust him in a way she cannot easily switch off. This trust grows into dependence. That dependence grows into attachment. And that attachment grows into something that feels like addiction, because he becomes the one person who brings her emotional world into order. The man who lives by principles instead of impulses. A man who lives without principles is unpredictable. He is guided by impulse, desire, mood, and external validation. He changes direction depending on who he wants to impress, who he fears disappointing, or what he thinks will earn approval. Women may find this kind of man exciting for a moment, but they never become addicted to him, because unpredictability without purpose creates instability, not attraction. The men women become addicted to are the ones who stand by clear values. Men who have boundaries, who know what they believe, who follow a personal code of conduct. These men are rare in the modern world, where most people operate on emotional impulse rather than grounded principles. But a man who acts with discipline, who says what he means and means what he says, becomes a psychological pillar. A principled man doesn't bend just to keep someone around. He doesn't chase to avoid losing someone. He doesn't compromise his identity to win approval. And because of this, women feel something powerful around him. Respect. Respect amplifies attraction. Respect deepens curiosity. Respect strengthens emotional memory. A woman becomes addicted to a man she respects because he provides something she subconsciously craves. Leadership grounded in integrity. He shows through his actions that he can control himself, and a man who can control himself commands attention. This type of man becomes unforgettable because he is not just emotionally stable, he is morally stable. His discipline makes her feel safe. His consistency makes her trust him. His values make her admire him. And admiration is one of the strongest forms of emotional attachment a woman can feel. A man guided by principles naturally stands out. He doesn't beg for attention. He doesn't need to prove anything. He simply lives in alignment with his beliefs, and this creates a powerful gravitational pull. Women don't just like this type of man. They become deeply, emotionally drawn to him because he represents something rare, something reliable, something grounded, and that reliability becomes addictive. White medium star, the man who provides psychological depth, not surface-level entertainment. Most men try to attract women by offering temporary excitement, jokes, constant texting, flirty lines, weekend plans, and superficial validation. And for a brief moment, this works. It creates a spark. It creates a dopamine hit. But it does not create addiction. Entertainment fades. Novelty dies. Attention loses its thrill. And the moment she gets used to it, she moves on, because there is nothing deeper to connect with. But the men women become addicted to, the kinds of men who stay in a woman's mind long after she walks away, are the ones who offer something that is becoming extremely rare in the modern world: psychological depth. Depth is not about being emotionally heavy. It's not about trauma sharing. It's not about being overly philosophical. Depth is the ability to think deeply, speak clearly, express ideas with meaning, and understand life beyond the surface level. It is the ability to reflect on one's choices, question one's impulses, and analyze one's patterns with honesty and clarity. A man with depth doesn't just talk, he communicates. He doesn't just listen, he understands. He doesn't just react, he reflects. And this creates a powerful psychological effect in a woman. She feels intellectually and emotionally stimulated in a way that is rare. Women become addicted to this because true depth is scarce. The modern world is filled with noise, distraction, short attention spans, and shallow communication. A man who can speak about life, purpose, responsibility, decisions, pain, ambition, and meaning with clarity becomes unforgettable. He offers her something she cannot get from social media, from casual conversations, or from the average man who only knows how to talk about trends, gossip, or temporary pleasures. Depth creates emotional resonance, and emotional resonance creates memory, and memory creates attachment. A woman becomes addicted to the man she can learn from, the man who expands her thinking, the man who makes her reflect, the man who challenges her worldview without trying to dominate her, the man who sees beneath the surface, not only of her, but of the world. This type of man becomes a mental imprint she cannot erase easily. His words stay with her. His conversations replay in her mind. His presence lingers even when he is silent. And that psychological imprint becomes addictive because she does not encounter it often. In a world full of noise, a man of depth becomes a signal, a rare signal that stands out loud and clear. White medium star, the man who doesn't chase her, yet doesn't fear losing her. One of Jordan Peterson's recurring themes is the importance of self-respect, of valuing oneself enough to not sacrifice integrity, purpose, or dignity for approval. And this principle becomes extremely powerful in relationships. Most men make one of two mistakes. They chase her excessively, giving away their time, energy, and emotional stability just to keep her around. Or they pretend not to care, acting cold, distant, or indifferent as a form of emotional manipulation. Both extremes are rooted in fear. The fear of losing her, or the fear of looking vulnerable. And fear always weakens a man's presence. Women can sense it instantly. But the men women become addicted to, truly addicted to, are the ones who occupy a powerful middle ground. They don't chase, but they also don't fear losing her. This mindset creates a paradox that is incredibly attractive. He wants her, but he doesn't need her. He values her, but he doesn't depend on her for emotional validation. He invests, but he never overextends. He cares, but he never collapses into insecurity. This type of man understands a fundamental truth. Attachment formed from fear weakens attraction. Attachment formed from strength intensifies it. A woman becomes addicted to a man who is emotionally secure enough to stay present without trying to possess her, and confident enough to walk away without collapsing. This balance creates psychological tension, and tension creates attraction. When a woman senses a man who is not afraid of loss, she feels something powerful: trust. Because the man who fears losing her will eventually burden her. He will try to control her. He will become reactive. He will become emotional unstable. But the man who is secure, even in uncertainty, creates peace around him, and peace is addictive. This type of man becomes her emotional constant. He shows that his identity is not built around her approval. He demonstrates that his value is inherent, not dependent. And in a world where many men cling tightly out of fear, the man who can love without losing himself becomes magnetic. Women do not get addicted to men who chase them. Women do not get addicted to men who ignore them. Women get addicted to men who remain self-respecting, composed, and independent, even while caring deeply. This psychological balance is one of the strongest forms of male attraction, and it is one of the hardest to replace. White medium star, the man who awakens her feminine instincts by living fully in his masculine energy. Women become addicted to men who embody stability, purpose, and strength, not just physically, but psychologically. Masculine energy, when expressed with integrity, discipline, and calm power, awakens a woman's deepest feminine instincts: softness, trust, emotional openness, and attraction. Masculinity is not aggression. It is not dominance. It is not control. Masculinity is direction. Masculinity is certainty. Masculinity is responsibility. Masculinity is competence under pressure. Masculinity is the willingness to bear the burden of one's own life. When a man carries these traits, he becomes a force, not a force against someone, but a force for something. And this sense of direction is deeply attractive to women because it provides emotional instinct with a place to rest. Women become addicted to a man whose masculine energy expresses itself not through arrogance, but through purpose. A man who prioritizes growth. A man who chooses responsibility over comfort. A man who protects his time, respects his goals, and takes life seriously enough to create something meaningful. This type of man becomes a psychological anchor because his masculinity does not demand anything from her. It simply expresses itself naturally, and this creates an emotional effect. She feels safe to be feminine around him. She softens. She opens up. She trusts more. She becomes more affectionate. She begins to invest emotionally, because the presence of true masculinity awakens true femininity. This connection becomes addictive because it creates a dynamic where both individuals feel their natural strengths amplified. The masculine man becomes more grounded. The feminine woman becomes more expressive. And this polarity is one of the most powerful forces in attraction. A woman will not walk away easily from a man who awakens her instinctive femininity. She will not forget the man who made her feel more like herself. She will not replace the man who gave her emotional space to be soft, expressive, and vulnerable. This kind of emotional resonance forms a bond deeper than appearance, status, or temporary excitement. It forms a bond rooted in instinct, and instinct is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. White medium star, the man who refuses to betray himself for approval. One of the most destructive patterns men fall into is the willingness to abandon their identity, goals, standards, and self-worth just to keep a woman happy. It looks like sacrifice, but it's not. It's self-betrayal disguised as love. And women sense it immediately. A woman cannot become addicted to a man who betrays himself, because a man who betrays himself will eventually betray her. A man who changes his personality to gain approval is unstable, insecure, and emotionally fragile. He becomes someone who reacts instead of leads, someone who follows instead of chooses, someone who fears emotional conflict instead of facing it. But the men who form deep emotional bonds with women, the ones they think about months or even years after separation, are the ones who remain loyal to themselves first. This does not mean selfishness. It does not mean coldness. It does not mean emotional distance. It means integrity. Integrity is the ability to say, "This is who I am. These are my values. This is a path I'm walking, and I will not abandon it for temporary validation." This type of man earns a woman's respect, and respect, once again, is the foundation of deep emotional attraction. A woman becomes addicted not to the man who pleases her, but to the man who stands firm in who he is, even when it is difficult. A man with self-respect becomes a psychological equivalent of solid ground, stable, predictable, trustworthy, safe. A woman knows that if he stays true to himself, he will also stay true to her. She knows that his words hold weight. She knows that his promises carry meaning, and she knows that his presence has substance. Women become addicted to men who show consistency not just toward her, but toward themselves, because loyalty to one's own principles is the deepest form of emotional strength, and emotional strength is magnetic. When a woman sees a man who refuses to collapse under pressure, who refuses to compromise his dignity, and who refuses to shrink himself for approval, she feels something primal awaken inside her, admiration mixed with desire, and that blend is powerful. It creates emotional memory. It creates psychological pull. It creates attachment that doesn't fade easily. This kind of man becomes a standard in her mind, something other men struggle to match. And once a standard is set, it becomes extremely difficult, sometimes impossible, to replace. White medium star, the man who lives a life larger than the relationship. A woman does not become addicted to a man who makes her his entire world. She becomes addicted to a man who has a world of his own, a world she wants to be part of. This is one of the strongest psychological truths about attraction. Women fall deepest for men who are in motion, men who are building, men who are evolving, men who are transforming themselves, men who live with intention, not passivity. A man whose life has direction naturally becomes attractive because he represents momentum, and momentum is exciting. A man who has goals, purpose, ambition, and a sense of mission becomes a man a woman cannot easily forget. Why? Because he is rare, because he is focused, because he doesn't rely on her for identity, because he is not emotionally idle. When a man is truly committed to his path, his career, his growth, his health, his discipline, his vision, he becomes larger than the relationship, not in a way that excludes her, but in a way that inspires her. A woman becomes addicted to the man who moves forward with or without her, because this creates something powerful, emotional gravity. She is pulled toward him. She leans into his direction. She feels his ambition. She admires his drive. She becomes emotionally invested in his evolution. This man does not become stagnant. He does not become predictable. He does not become safe in a boring way. He becomes safe in a strong, exciting, and forward-moving way. Women crave security, yes, but they also crave inspiration. They crave a man who wakes something inside them, curiosity, excitement, growth, passion. A man who stops growing becomes easy to replace. A man who continues growing becomes unforgettable. And that is the essence of psychological addiction. A woman becomes drawn to the man whose life is expanding, and she wants to expand with him. White medium star, the man she can't forget. When you combine everything we've discussed, you begin to understand the truth behind why women become addicted to certain men. It's not manipulation. It's not tricks. It's not charm. It is psychological presence. A woman becomes addicted to a man who brings order to her chaos, who leads himself with discipline, who speaks with depth, who acts with integrity, who refuses to betray himself, who walks his path with confidence, and who embodies masculine stability in a world that desperately lacks it. She remembers the man who stayed composed when others panicked, She remembers the man who stood by his values when others folded. She remembers a man who inspired her instead of entertaining her. She remembers the man who challenged her instead of chasing her. She remembers the man who made her feel safe without controlling her. She remembers the man who gave her space to be feminine by being fully masculine. She remembers the man who lived a life of purpose, not for her, but for himself. This is the type of man women become addicted to. Not because he demands it, not because he forces it, not because he manipulates it, but because he earns it through strength, integrity, depth, and direction. If you become this kind of man, you won't need to chase. You won't need to beg. You won't need to play games. Your presence will speak for itself. Your discipline will create attraction. Your purpose will create emotional gravity. And your character will create loyalty that no one can easily break. This is the man she remembers long after you're gone. This is the man she thinks about late at night. This is the man she compares others to. This is the man she struggles to walk away from. This is the man women get addicted to, because he is the man who is not easily replaced.